Hello, my friend, and welcome to Fear into Faith. This is our Miracles, Signs, and Wonders series. And do we have a story for you today about a miracle where God saved a life and saved a leg? Can't wait to hear that one. I'm your host, Summer Day, and with me in the studio is Nickell. Hello there, beautiful. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Summer. How are you?
Fabulous. You excited to be here? A little nervous? What's going on with you?
I'm very, very excited, but I'm also nervous. First time being in a studio, so this is interesting and fun.
Is this the first time you've shared your story like this?
In this manner, yes.
Awesome, awesome. Well, before we get to your story of God saving a life and a leg, which I kind of like that little cliffhanger, let's just hear a little bit about you. Where are you from?
I'm from Waco, Texas, just south of here. Yeah.
Were you born and raised there?
No, born and raised up in Iowa, in the cold.
Up in Iowa in the cold?
In the cold. Came down to Texas as soon as I could and love it here.
Nice. And what do you do?
I am a coach. A story shepherd coach is what I call myself.
Story shepherd coach? I have not heard this term before.
Yes.
What does a story shepherd coach do?
I guide weary people to transform their story through faith, to come to a new life, and basically make their life amazing as it should be.
Come on. I think everybody needs that. That sounds good.
Yeah.
I love it. And have you always been walking in really strong faith?
Yes, always.
Your whole life?
My whole life.
Stop it. That's so rare.
Yeah.
So, born and raised in the church?
Yes. Went to the Methodist church, born and raised, tiny little town, wonderful little church,
Okay,
amazing
how tiny
pastor.
is a tiny town? Because I feel like everyone has a different definition of what a tiny town is. Are we talking 20 people, 800?
200 people.
Oh, that's really tiny.
Yes, very tiny
That's
town.
Like you were the only one in your graduating class?
40 people.
In your graduating class?
Yes.
Oh, that seems much larger than I would expect from a town of 200.
We had to combine two cities.
Oh, I can do all the math now. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
And so you're going to the Methodist church in your tiny town. What's the tiny town called?
Linden.
Linden,
Iowa.
Iowa. Okay. Mm-hmm. And did you always remember just being close to God, going to church?
Mainly because of my dad and my mom. But my dad was very, very faithful man. And before I ever had my miracle story, my dad had his. And he was sick for 20 years after a heart attack.
Wow.
But every single day, he believed that God kept him alive to share his story. And he gave him grace by allowing him to be around another 20 years to see his kids, graduate, grandkids. He got to see great-grandkids. He got to see grandkids get married. He got to have all those wonderful things. So even though he was sick, you would never, ever hear anything out of his mouth about being not blessed. That God was always there with him. And so growing up with that, hearing that, it made me have a stronger faith. Seeing someone who had gone through a lot still stay so strong in his faith, it was amazing. And so I've kind of follow after him.
That's amazing. You hear teenage girls, they grow up, they get rebellious and crazy. I was one of them. No one would have wanted me as their teenage daughter, let alone when I was young in my 20s. No. I was a hot mess and a wreck. But you were able to just stay strong in your faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, always had it, baptized young. And yeah, I've just always had that belief, and I've always believed God is there with me. I had other incidents before the miracle where I felt that there's always been an angel with me.
Wow.
And I sometimes joke with my family and friends and say that I have this guardian angel who every day is going, wow, she's worn out because she's followed me around.
She's tired.
She's tired. She's following me
Can I
through
take a
all these
break
different
already?
things.
So hilarious. When did you, you talked about your dad, but when did you start to see miracles in your own life? Or was the miracle with you the first one you experienced?
That was the first, what I call real miracle, but I feel like I've seen other little things. One incident was when I was pretty young. I used to sleepwalk at night, and we had a big 2-story house.
Oh, wow.
And I had a dream one night, and walking through the upstairs, and I came around to the top of the stairs, and in my dream, I was getting ready to jump. Something stopped me and woke me from that dream. And I remember standing there looking down the stairs, just feeling, just this relief.
Yeah.
And being able just to go back to bed. So just little things like that may seem little to some people, but like I said, I felt like I had that guardian angel there watching over me all the time.
Like, wake up, wake up.
Wake up, go to safety. And I did.
Wow. Any other things that you remember?
That's the main one. A couple of other car accidents, or coming close to getting in a car accident and having an urge to turn at the last minute and being okay. So, like I said, little things that other people might overlook, but...
Now, with your miracle story, how has your faith grown?
Oh, it's grown exponentially because of that. Like I said, I already had a strong faith, but then when you see, or not only see, but receive a miracle like that, it's just, to me, how can you ever deny, God or Jesus exist at that point? So even if there had been a little bit of doubt, which there wasn't really any doubt, but I had been through some other things. I was in an emotionally abusive marriage, took 20 years to get out of that. Had some other incidents happen with family. And so having that happen and laying there, knowing that, I was lucky to be alive, but after hearing that, then being told, right after I'm told that...
Okay, hold on, we're going to pause that.
Okay, we'll pause there.
We're going to do the whole story here in chronological order.
Okay.
But I love that you just threw out, and by the way, I was married for 20 years, abusive. We'll just jump over that. No! So during those 20 years, were you still walking in strong faith, even in the struggling marriage?
Mm-hmm. I had trouble during that time. Because of it, I ended up with anxiety and lost a lot of friends because of it, because I just sort of hid myself away. But I still always prayed. And it was always, guide me, help me figure out what am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah.
And so I tried for 20 years to make it work. We even went to see a Christian counselor at one point. And it finally, when I realized that he wasn't ever going to change, even with the Bible, even with, the Christian counselor giving us guidance, he wasn't going to change. And so I had a rough time because there were people in the church who I knew through him who would tell me that, getting divorced was a sin.
Yeah.
And basically telling me I had to put up with whatever I was putting up with, otherwise I would be a sinner against God.
Wow.
And it finally took a book written by another Christian counselor. I was looking for something completely different that day, online, looking for a book, and this book popped up that said, The Emotionally Abusive Marriage.
Wow.
And so I, just like that, bought it. And every single chapter of that book told me that I was being abused.
Wow.
In ways that I didn't even realize.
Wow.
And knowing it was written by a Christian counselor sort of gave me that freedom to know that it's not okay to be abused. It's not okay to be put down every single day.
Wow.
And it's okay to walk away from that.
Yeah.
And so I did. I walked away from it, got that new freedom. And once again, I felt like it was that God signal, that telling me by that book.
Wow.
Because it wasn't on my radar. It just popped up.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah. So I think he's there every step of the way.
So good. You're giving a mom hope because, I have 3 girls and I'm like, all I want, Jesus, is for them to just stay strong in their faith their whole life and then never let your hand go. And, I know life sometimes has to happen for some of us, but sometimes there's people that, they're able to stay strong in their faith their whole time. All right, we're going to get into your miracle story. Okay. But before we do, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back right after this. Welcome back, my friend. We are with Nickell. And she's about to tell us her story of how God saved a life and a leg. And I love this story, and I can't wait for you to share it. Just take us back. How long ago did this happen?
This was about 5 years ago.
Okay, 5 years ago. And what was going on with you?
I got the flu one weekend, and it got to the point, it was so bad. I mean, whole body aching, stomach issues, I needed help. And so I took myself to urgent care. They ran all the tests. And it came back showing I had a little bit of inflammation on my abdomen. White blood cell count was a little high. Basically, I had the flu. Yeah. And that told them. So they gave me a prescription for an antibiotic and a pain pill, sent me home. And the next day, I took that very first antibiotic, and within just a few hours, I started losing feeling in my legs
From your antibiotic.
from the antibiotic.
I've never heard of this happening before.
Yeah, I hadn't either until suddenly I couldn't walk.
I mean, I've taken antibiotics so many times I can't even count.
Yeah.
And here you are hours later, you're starting to lose feeling in your
Yep.
legs.
Yeah, and it just, from that point, just continued until I couldn't feel anything from the knees down.
When you say continued, how fast?
It was fast, within just a couple of hours. It just, all the feeling gone.
Oh my gosh, what were you feeling? Like,
Just fear.
yeah, I was like, were you freaking out? Going,
Yeah,
is
I
it
was-
going to just keep progressing and then you won't move at all?
Yes, I mean, I was worried. Just think, didn't know what was going to happen after that.
Yeah.
And I knew then, thank goodness, I was there with my boyfriend, and he had to basically like work on getting me into the truck because I had no feeling in my legs.
Oh my gosh.
And we made the mistake. Well, maybe it wasn't a mistake. We went back to urgent care instead of going to emergency. And we went in because I'd just been there the night before. When they heard what was happening, they basically said, we don't know what to do. So they called the hospital and stuck me on an ambulance.
Wow.
And, rushed me there. And thankfully
That must have been even more scary because
It
they're like,
was.
hey, we can't help you. We don't know what to do. And you're like, what?
Yes, and so I'm laying in that ambulance, first time ever in an ambulance.
Wow.
And just not knowing what was going to happen next, and I didn't know what was happening to my body. And thankfully, they called ahead, and they called in their vascular surgeon, and he was off, but he made it to the hospital by the time I did. So they rushed me in. They ran a CT scan, which I just had one done the night before, and nothing was wrong. The CT scan that day suddenly showed my entire body filled with blood clots. So that's what had happened with the antibiotic. Why I had lost feeling is just suddenly my body was just full of them.
Is it just, that's how it reacted to the antibiotic? Is this a rare side effect you don't hear about, or?
I've heard of it happening now. I've heard about it happening in other situations, but
Wow.
yeah, this was just a rare thing. And so they rushed me into surgery, and they had to cut me in both groins, and just the surgeon went in and started pulling out blood clots. And during surgery, while he was doing that, my left leg developed, they call it compartment syndrome. And basically, my left leg got so swollen from the pressure of the blood clots that it was about to burst.
I did not ever hear about this. I didn't know this was a thing. So you
Yeah.
can get blood clots so bad that it'll just burst open your leg?
Yeah, the pressure. And compartment syndrome, they say, normally happens to athletes from all the pressure to their bodies. That will sometimes happen. So this, once again, was a weird side effect of the blood clots. So he then had to, they call it a double fasciotomy, had to cut my leg open on either side to relieve the pressure to try to save it.
Oh my gosh. And you're out right now, right?
I'm out. Yeah, I have
You're
no
under,
idea.
You have no idea what's going on.
No. And so thankfully, God saved me during the surgery. So they got me out of surgery. And when I woke, he's explaining all of this, what had happened, told me that in all of his years of surgery had never seen anything like this with that amount of blood clots, and told me, you're lucky to be alive. And of course, I'm thinking, I'm not lucky, I'm grateful, I'm blessed that I'm here. Well,
Are you also just in a whole lot of shock of like,
complete shock.
are you kidding me? That was happening?
Yeah, and then he tells me, after he explains all this, told me what he had to do, tells me about my leg. And then says, but what I did to save it didn't work, and we're now preparing to amputate. And that's what I woke up to.
Even, oh my gosh. So he's telling you they removed all the blood clots so you're at least alive? Like, if they couldn't remove all the blood clots, you would have just
Oh, yeah.
passed away on the table? So he's kind of like, okay, if I got this straight, the good news is, like, you are alive.
You're alive.
The bad news is all this stuff's happening, and even though, so I cut open your leg, I tried doing everything, we're going to have to take the whole leg. I cannot even imagine having the flu, going in, getting an antibiotic, and then saying, oh, by the way, we're going to have to amputate your leg.
All from the flu. This happened within just a few days. This is what's going on. Actually, just a couple of days, yeah.
How did you mentally process having a doctor say, we're going to have to take your leg?
At first, I think God was protecting me in one way because a lot of it was shock. And so instead of breaking down mentally, it was just this utter shock and not really knowing what to do initially. And thankfully, once again, because of what my body had been through, and they still wanted to make sure they had gotten everything, so they told me, we're going to wait. Because the next day, they then ran more tests, and they wanted to check behind my heart and lungs to make sure that all the blood clots were gone. And so they gave me this 2-day window of them checking my body, making sure everything was okay besides the leg.
Now, could you look down and see your leg, or were they all bandaged up? Or
It was bandaged up, but when they undid the bandages, I can tell you how bad it was if you want to hear it.
Okay, well, like the PG version.
Well, I had never been able to basically look inside of a wound, and
Wow.
it was so deep that I could look inside and see my ligaments and muscles moving. So if that tells you anything,
Wow.
I mean,
And then obviously you could see the giant amount of swelling.
Mm-hmm.
Was it discolored or?
well, the reason they said my leg and foot were dead, the coloring of my foot was that awful black and blue, purple, I mean, just the
way.
horrible color that basically tells you it's dead. And they couldn't find a pulse. And so those two things that were telling them my leg and foot were dead.
Wow. And then they were waiting a couple of days to do the surgery. Also, probably they wanted to make sure you were strong enough to handle it, right? Your heart, your lungs could handle
Yes.
another surgery. And
Yeah, so they waited.
were there people with you in the hospital?
Like family,
Yeah, or were you by yourself?
my boyfriend was there with me, thank goodness. And so yeah, he was there with me.
How did he handle all this?
He was pretty nervous through all of it, and I could tell he was scared. Just because he has doctors and nurses and people telling me things, telling him things, and it's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But he stayed there by my side, and I contacted my sisters and my mom, and I was in Texas, they were up in Iowa. They all hopped in a car to come down to be with me.
Wow.
So when they left believing that they were going to come find me without a leg.
Without a leg. What a great family you have.
Oh, yeah, wonderful.
How many sisters?
I have 3 sisters.
3 sisters and mom jumping in a car saying, we're going to go be there, help take care of
Yep.
you. And that's amazing.
Yeah, so they all came down, but in those 2 days, with that time, I started praying.
Wow.
And I kept praying, and I remembered, just from my past, remembering that gratitude is huge. And so
good.
even though I wanted another miracle,
Yeah.
I kept thanking God for my life. I kept saying, thank you, thank you that I'm still
Yeah, yeah.
here. And then after I would,
What about your mom and your sisters? Were they praying too?
oh yeah, they told me they were praying all
Everyone
the way
was
down.
put on notice praying.
Everybody's praying. And thank goodness I have a praying family. So, everybody was praying.
Wow.
And
all right, we're going to take a break.
Okay.
We're going to go to commercial, and we'll be right back right after this. We're back, my friend. And Ann Nichols, you left us off with, you've been in the hospital. You've been told they got to take your leg, but they were waiting a couple days to make sure your heart and lungs and everything were good. And you started praying.
Praying, yes.
And you were saying praying, not just praying, but being in gratitude and everything. Tell us about that.
Yes, trying to be in gratitude the entire time while I'm praying, and just trying to be on that upside, knowing that things, could be worse, but I've already been blessed with one miracle, with God saving my life. And so I think that helps when you've already received that blessing, knowing that it's possible. And so I kept praying, but not only praying, I then started visualizing. And I started picturing myself in the future, back to normal, that God had answered my prayer. And I could see myself walking through the park, just all body parts intact, walking normally. And I just kept that vision and just continued to pray. And I did that for 2 days straight while I let them do all their stuff around me. And that was part of it too, is anytime the nurses would come in, doctors would come in, I'm a normally nice person anyway, and even with the pain and everything I was going through, a nurse would come into the room and I would say, how are you doing? And they would tell me what they were going to do. I'm like, okay, do what you need to do. And then I would focus, and I would just continue to focus on my prayers and that visual I had of seeing myself in the future and back to normal. And so then on that 3rd day, the night nurse came in one more time in the morning, because they were doing checks every few hours too, just, I guess, to see if it was okay.
Yeah.
And so he came in and he pulled back the sheet and he gave me this look. And so I looked down and my coloring had completely come back. All of that horrible coloring just gone.
Wow.
So that was the first stage. So then he got excited and he ran and got
Did he say anything to you?
He just had this kind of excited look on his face, and he ran and got what they call the Doppler. It's how they hear the pulses. And so he, put it against my foot and he was listening, and he looked up again and I said, "You can hear," he goes, "There's a pulse. Very, very slight, but there was a pulse." So for 2 days of nothing, and suddenly on that third day, like my leg and foot had come back to life.
Wow.
Yep.
And so I'm sure the doctors came in, all that kind of stuff. What happened next?
They came in later, and because a couple others had came in first, because I think everybody was in shock. And so they all kept taking turns, listening in that Doppler. And by the time the surgeon came back in later, they had found 2 pulses. So now there were 2 pulses, which that's what told him that I was okay. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, I'm excited, and I was like...
What's the surgeon saying?
Oh, nobody could believe it. And so the next thing I knew, I had this...
I mean, is that even possible? Has that ever happened before?
According to him, no. Yeah, so like I said, they were in shock. And so other surgeons, doctors, nurses all coming into my room.
You're now the most popular person in the hospital.
Yes, I was.
Everybody's coming to see you.
Yep. And so I had this, surrounded by all these people, everybody taking turns listening to the Doppler because no one could believe it. Wow. And they're trying to find a way to explain it, and I'm laying there just going, this is a miracle. Yeah. That's what it is. It's a complete miracle.
Wow.
And so from there, I felt great. But then the surgeon said to me, after all of this, after 2 undeniable miracles, he says, "Well, you get to keep your leg, but you might have been better off with a prosthetic." And I stared at him like, "What? Like, how could that be?" And he said, "Well, because of the nerve damage from him cutting my leg open," he said, "we don't know if or when you'll ever get your feeling back." He said, "Broken bones, torn ligaments, those are things we understand. Nerve damage, there's still so much about it we don't know."
Wow.
So because of that, I can't tell you if or when you'll ever get that feeling back. So you're probably going to be a gimp the rest of your life. That was the first time I cried in 3 days.
Oh, you'd never cried before that?
No,
You stayed strong the whole time?
I stayed strong the whole time. And I don't know if it was that sudden relief a little bit, topped with him saying that to me. And it was almost, I think I was feeling too, it was like, how can you say something like that when we've all witnessed 2 miracles?
Yeah.
And he still just had this downside come out. And so after I got through the crying, I actually cried for about 24 hours. Just like once I started crying, like the floodgates were released, and I couldn't stop. Mm-hmm. Even though I felt okay, I couldn't stop. And so the nurses would come in to check on me, and I'd be laying there crying, like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I just can't stop crying. I'm fine." and I just told myself, I've already received these 2 miracles. I'm going to see what else God can do.
Yeah.
And so I just sort of put aside what he said, because he also then told me that the 2 wounds wouldn't heal on their own, because one of them had actually torn after he cut it.
Oh, wow.
And so they're huge. Mm-hmm. And he said they won't heal on their own. You're going to have plastic surgery with the skin grafting. So that would have meant, more scarring, more surgeries. And I just said, you know what? I'll just see how it goes. I'll see what God can do.
You're like, I'll just go for miracle number 3.
Yeah, exactly. And so every day after that, it took me another couple of weeks to get out of the hospital. For one, what my body had been through, I couldn't eat. Mm. And so I was living on shakes. That's all they could get me to keep down were shakes. And they weren't going to let me out of the hospital until I could at least kind of stand partially on my own without passing out, because I would stand and move a little bit and I would turn green and almost pass out.
Oh, wow.
Because my body was so weak from everything that had happened to it. And so finally got out of the hospital, and it was rough after that, because where we live, they do have care, but the best care I could find was a bus that would come pick me up for my appointments, but I had to get from the house to the bus.
Oh, wow.
And I had a walker. I had to get downstairs. And like I said, if I went more than 10 feet, I would turn green and almost pass out.
Wow.
And I couldn't get that help. And my poor boyfriend, he's, working, going to school.
Yeah.
We just found out that his mom was sick. So we had so many other things going on. And so I remember one day laying in bed and just kind of breaking down. One of the first times I actually broke down from all of it because I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I knew I needed care, but I wasn't going to have him take away from what he was doing because, I didn't want to mess up his life because of what was happening with me. And so I called my sisters. I was crying. I said, I don't know what to do. Well, my mom was a retired nurse.
Wow.
And so, she was at home alone. She loved when I came to visit. I said, why don't we come down and get you? We'll bring you here and you can stay here and get the care up here.
Wow.
And so then it was a long trip from Texas to Iowa, me laying in the back of my Jeep with my leg up and then trying to get to where I could get care.
Yeah.
And so I got there, and my mom then started helping me change the dressings on my wounds. She took me back and forth to wound care and physical therapy appointments. And so from there, I started feeling like, okay, I can do this now because I can get to where I need to be.
Yeah.
And so I remember going into the wound care people and telling them, teach me what to do.
Wow.
Because I need my wounds to heal. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with physical therapy, I went into them and they thought it was a little nuts because when I came into them, like I said, I was using a walker.
Yeah.
I had barely put this foot down on the ground, yet I had no feeling, but yet I told them I need to learn how to walk again in 6 weeks.
Yeah. Well, we only have like a minute left. Obviously, we know that you're walking now, so the wound's completely healed.
7 months, the wounds healed on their own, no surgery.
Wow, come on.
I walked again in 6 weeks with no feeling in my foot.
What?
And God just kept giving me one miracle after another. And here I am today. I'm not a gimp. You've seen me. I walk around.
Yes, you walk very well.
I walk, I dance, I run, do whatever I want to do. And because God kept blessing me and he still is.
Thanks for being here and sharing
Thank
your
you.
story. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's so powerful. I pray that you are blessed by this story and that you take to heart what happens when you're willing to go against what a doctor says or go against what people are saying and go within and go higher and just turn to the Lord and continue to pray diligently for 2 days and watch God show up in a miracle in your life. We'll see you next time, my friend.